Tonight our speaker is Michael Ramsden. Michael is the International Director of Zacharias Trust, which is an international ministry. He spends a lot of his time traveling around the world. He's spoken in NATO, he's spoken at the European Union, and he's spoken at the White House, and so we're very lucky to have him here tonight. So please would you welcome Michael Ramsden.
I've been here all day. I've been speaking at some of the different services across this church, HTB, which meets at different times, different locations. And I've been sort of mixing up the messages a little bit from one place to another. And as I was coming up here, I was thinking, what should I speak on? And I wasn't quite sure. So, because at one point I was thinking, maybe I'll speak to you about our search for peace and how we have this longing for peace and we're wondering where it may be found. On the other hand, I was also wondering about speaking to you about the issue of integrity and why integrity matters and why that might be important today. And so it's been suggested to me that since we've just had an election, I should put it to a vote. So you get to choose what I speak on right now. So if you'd like me to speak on the issue of integrity, I'm going to ask you to put your hand up second. But if you'd like me to speak on our search for peace, then put up your hand first. So who is interested in hearing about our search for peace? Let's just see. That's okay. Integrity? Wow. Okay. Well, let's go with peace then. Okay. All right. Integrity, interesting to see. I mean, of course, we're raising this question just off the back of a huge election. Now, the interesting thing about our search for integrity is actually an issue which hangs over us in many ways, in so many different ways. And it also affects what we do in so many ways and how we actually think. Now, the word integrity comes from a Latin word, which, well, actually, forget about the notes, it doesn't make it any more interesting. The word integrity actually comes from a Latin phrase. We often like to translate things into Latin because it makes them sound more profound. It's like the story of a headmaster who wanted to introduce a new school motto into his school, and he came up with the motto, I hear, I see, I learn. And he sent it off to a publishing house a printing house, and they're going to make new school badges and also a new logo for the school. And the printers wrote back to the headmaster and they said, you know what, we love your logo and your motto, we think it's great. Would you like us to translate the motto into Latin? Because if we print it in Latin, it's going to have more gravitas. You see, 3 of you got that. Now, and they said, and also, but it will read better in Latin if we can translate the phrase I learn into the passive I am taught. Is that okay? And the headmaster said, yeah, sure, okay, whatever, so long as it's got that I hear, I see, I learn sort of ring to it. Well, imagine how excited the children were when they came back to school at the beginning of the next academic year, and there outside the school on a giant billboard is the new school motto with the words audio, video, disco written around the edges of it. Now, the trouble with some of these words, especially like integrity from the Latin integritas, is we don't actually really know what they mean. And so we're using words in a sense whereby we fail to capture their significance. And as I said, the word integrity, if you were to look it up in the dictionary, and I did actually have a quick peek just before setting off today to see how it was defined in my dictionary. It starts off, as it does with most words, with giving a negative definition and then a positive one. So negatively, it was defined as uncorrupted, undivided, sinless. Those are interesting words. Positively, it was defined as wholeness, being whole, being complete, being united, integrated, one. Someone has integrity if they are integrated. They are the same person with everyone they are with. They're not one thing with one group and something else with another. And we look for integrity and we value it in our leaders. Now, the challenge is therefore, when you talk about integrity, you are literally talking about what does it mean to be whole? What does it mean to be complete? What does it mean to be one person, a whole person? And that is a huge, huge issue. Our elections in the Western world are by and large fought on battles on justice and integrity. What does it mean to be human? What should a society look like? What does it mean to bring and have a society which allows people to be whole, to be complete? Now, it's very interesting if you listen to what politicians say and how they speak, because many political speeches will go something like this. Our country is sick. Our nation is sick. And if you vote for us, we will make it better. Now, it was a thinker by the name of G.K. Chesterton who said, this is quite dangerous language. He said there is a big difference between medical science and social and political science. Now, in medical science, if you go to hospital, the doctors may well disagree about why you are ill. There may be no agreement about your sickness, but the doctors are utterly united in their vision of what a healthy body looks like. The doctors, by necessity, may send you home with one leg less, but they will never, in some kind of strange creative rapture, send you home with one leg more. Okay, so the doctors may disagree about what's making you ill, but they're united on what is actually making you whole, what a healthy body looks like. Now, in political and social science, it goes the other way around. All politicians seem happy to say that we're sick and we're unwell. What they can't agree on is what the good looks like. And what one political party suggests as a solution to the problem of the sickness to another political party is worse than the sickness it's claiming to address. It is because we can't agree on the good and decide on what the good is that we tear each other's eyes out, which is why you always need a healing time after any political process, because of this lack of unity of vision of what it means to be whole, integrated, complete as a human, undivided, sinless, uncorrupted, as we should be. Now, the questions of integrity become increasingly strong when we raise it and think about it in terms of how it affects life. Integrity matters because it affects every single area of your life. It affects every relationship that you have, regardless of how you approach it. Your friends are people whom you know you can trust. They tell you the truth. Your friends cease to be your friends if you find out that they're lying to you, deceiving you, betraying you, stabbing you in the back. At that point, they cease to be friends because we are questioning whether we can trust them, whether we can rely on them. We feel that they no longer have any form of integrity. Every close relationship you have is driven by and actually depends on this quality of integrity. Now, I spend a lot of time also speaking to various business leaders around the world. And sometimes business leaders will say something like, look, Michael, talking about integrity is great in a very abstract way, but we live in the real world. In the real business world where figures are simply the bottom line, integrity doesn't come into it. But that is simply not true. Businessmen make decisions about integrity every single day. It's not that we will not do business with people we do not trust. In the business world, we demand a higher rate of return to justify our investment in that business deal because of the risk it brings. We make decisions about people's integrity, about their morals and their ethics all the time. There isn't a single part of the world which is immune from it. Some of you in this room will be just about old enough to remember September the 11th, 2001. That's when planes flew into buildings around the world. And as a result of those attacks, the stock markets around the world collapsed. Now, what some of you may not remember is that by early 2002, stock markets around the world had largely recovered. But a few months after they had recovered, we had some massive scandals with companies like WorldCom and Enron, and actually many others, who literally were wiped off the face of the earth because they had a massive moral internal failure. And as a result of the collapse of these companies, the stock market around the world fell further and faster than it did after the terrorist attacks of September 2001, telling us that what the market feared the most was not a terrorist attack from without, but a moral collapse from within. Questions of integrity affect us all of the time. It affects every relationship you have because our relationships are morally and ethically governed. Because they are issues of trust. We're asking ourselves, who can we trust and what do we trust? I don't know if any of you ever got to see a little TV program. It was discontinued. It was called Lie to Me. I loved this TV program. It was based off the real-life research of a guy called Dr. Paul Ekman. Now, Paul Ekman did his research at the University of Oxford. And he was interested in what are now called micro-expressions. If you ever watch a spy movie, You will now see when they interview someone, there's always this close-up of the eye, a close-up of the mouth. Have you noticed that? Someone's looking at all these screens. That's because Paul Ekman realized that regardless of your background, regardless of where you were raised, it doesn't matter if you're from China or Africa or America or Europe, every face gives the same micro-expressions when we're lying. And therefore, if you can read those micro-expressions, you can figure out when someone's lying to you or maybe feeling guilty about something. And that's very powerful information. So you can imagine how much money this guy has made advising corporations and secret services around the world how to read these expressions and spot them and what they may actually signify. Now, as you would expect, a man who has spent most of his life trying to spot when people are lying has also thought about the nature of a lie. And he has something very interesting to say. Let me just read to you one of his conclusions. Trust, he says, is a matter of faith, that the person who is trusted won't exploit that trust. Intimacy in close working relationships, romance and friendships requires and in fact depends on trust. It is well known that the last person to realize that he or she is being betrayed is the person suffering the betrayal. Why? Because the betrayed person's trust quite simply blocks out recognition of any signs of the blind breach of faith. All the signs that everyone else around them can so easily pick up on. We don't want to learn that our trust has been betrayed, that the person you hired is embezzling, that your children are stealing money from your purse. It is terrible to discover that our trust has been misgiven. Most of us, therefore, willfully avoid any clues to its discovery. Once trust has been betrayed, can it ever be restored? Not always, and not by everyone. Even when the betrayal is forgiven, and the betrayed person does not want to give up the relationship, it may, in fact, still be very difficult to completely trust again. That is the price of lying about serious matters, the loss of trust that may never be restored. Suspicion, on the other hand, the opposite of trust, undermines relationships and results in the suspicious person's misery. Just listen to that again. Suspicion, on the other hand, the opposite of trust, undermines relationships and results in the suspicious person's misery. All of us face choices. Do we, based on faith, take the risk of being misled by trusting? Or do we take the risk of not only disbelieving a truthful person, but never being able to establish close connections because of chronic suspicion? Who do you trust? On what basis do you trust them? Would you think of yourself as being trustworthy? This question of why integrity matters and the issue of integrity goes right to the heart of our 21st century. It's become one of the buzzwords. If you read the press, if you watch the news, we're talking about integrity as never before because we don't know who to trust. What does it mean to be trustworthy? What does it mean to have integrity? Now, when you start talking about integrity, being whole, you're also invoking categories of purpose. You're asking questions about, well, therefore, what does it mean to be a person, to be complete? What does that actually look like? Now that raises some very profound questions. Let's suppose you see me with I have one of those new iPad Airs. And let's suppose you see me using my iPad Air while I'm talking, because sometimes I need to use some notes. And you come up to me at the end and you say, Michael, that's amazing that you have one of those. Are you having any success with it? And I was to say to you, oh yes. You know, it's incredible. I own a small coffee shop. That's how I get my money from. And the most common order in my coffee shop is 2 medium-sized cappuccinos. And do you know the iPad Air is the perfect size tray on which to serve 2 medium cappuccinos? I've been using it for quite a few weeks now in order to do this, and it's amazing. As a matter of fact, I'm going to buy an iPad Air for every single person who works in the cafe, and from now on we will serve all of our cappuccinos off iPad Airs. Now, let's suppose that was my response to you. I think you would look at me and say, Michael, I'm not sure if you know what that thing is for. What are you for? What is the basis on which you will decide whether you are successfully operating as a person? Now, these raise some very big questions, and you'll have to invite me back to come and speak on the issue of identity and how we understand it, to understand all of that. But what is it that informs that? How are we answering that question? Now, I was doing a little bit of research a little while ago because I'd been asked to address this issue to a group of business guys, and I was fascinated to see, I was fascinated to be able to address them. I was speaking in the city over here to a whole group of accountants and people who work in banks. And the question of integrity has become absolutely fundamental to all of them. And as I was doing my research, I thought I'd have a look, get online, and see what other people are saying about integrity. And I found some online courses by one of the world's most famous professors of ethics and morals in today's society, to business people, at one of the world's leading universities. And I sat down and I watched this lecture series to see what he would have to say. And at one point, he said something which I felt was very controversial. He said, science has clearly proved that all people are basically good. When the chips are down, we will always do the right thing. Now, I have to say, I find this particular conclusion highly suspect. Now, if you are sat here today and you believe that you are basically good, you don't basically do anything wrong. The only way to burst that bubble of self-deception is to get married. Now, in a commitment-phobic society, there are many people who don't want to get married, so they prefer to stay single. Now, I think I spoke about this when I was here a couple of years ago, but so let me just repeat it. Guys, you need to overcome that. It's a problem. Now, how do we therefore understand ourselves then if it's not the case that actually we're not as good as we like to think to be? Because I think what is much more true is actually what you read in the Bible. In the Bible, the Apostle Paul, in a book called Romans, says this. He says, I do not understand what I do. The good I want to do, I don't do it. The things I don't want to do, I keep on doing them. I have the desire to carry out what is good, but I just don't do it. In my inner being, he says, I delight in God's law, but I just fail to carry it out. Now, I think what he is describing there is much more real. Most of us have the desire to be good. Most of us dream about what it would be like to be noble, to be pure, to always make the right decision, say the right thing, respond in the right way. But the truth is, if we examine ourselves, that's simply not true. We don't act that way. Now, this doesn't mean that, therefore, we never see anything good in anyone. That's not what this is saying. I have 3 children, the eldest of which is now 16 and about to do her GCSEs. Now, by the age of 14, she'd grown her hair, so it was several inches below the bottom of her spine. So she had very long hair. And I was getting ready to go away on a trip for about a week to go and speak somewhere, and she said, Dad, you need to be prepared for a shock, because when you come home, my hair will be much shorter. Now, I realized that something dramatic had happened, because when I landed, my wife rang me while I was still at the airport and said, Michael, when you come home, you are to say nothing about Lucy's hair, apart from the fact that she looks beautiful. So, as a man under authority, I come home and I do as I'm told. I knock on the door, my eldest daughter opened the door, and her hair has been cut up to here. And so I look and I say, sweetheart, you look beautiful, and I give her a big hug. Now, 4 days later, my wife is out because she leads the cello section of a local orchestra she plays in. So she's out rehearsing, and now I'm alone with my 16-year-old daughter. And I finally got the chance to ask her the question that's been eating me up inside for 4 days. So we're sat next to each other, we're watching TV, and I smile, first of all, because, you know, sometimes you say something comes out with the wrong tone. So I'm thinking happy thoughts, happy expression, yeah. Okay. I started breathing, like center. Like that. And then when I feel I've got all those components right, as casually as I can, I say, so, sweetheart, what prompted the change of style? Was it fashion? Were you bored? Did you just want to try something different? What was it? And she looked at me and she said, well, I was watching this TV documentary a few weeks ago about this charity that make wigs for 7, 8, and 9-year-old girls who've lost all their hair because they have leukemia. And the charity was saying that they were struggling to get enough hair to make wigs for these girls. And she said, and as I was watching it, I was thinking that I would like to donate my hair to that charity. So a hairdresser called Luke, who was actually part of this church, traveled up to Oxford, and she had it plaited in a special way. and tied up so it wouldn't get all tangled. And he came and he cut off those plaits and they put them in a padded envelope, 4 of them, and mailed them off to this charity so they could make wigs for these girls. I don't know if any of you have ever read a book entitled Little Women, but there's a scene in that book where the heroine sells her hair in order to give money to her mother to buy a train ticket so she can go and visit her father who's dying in a military hospital hundreds of miles away from home. And as the mother takes the money, she looks at her daughter and she says, "Your hair will regrow, but you'll never be more beautiful to me than you are right now." And as I sat next to Lucy, I know she'd read this book. And I said, "Sweetheart, do you remember Little Women?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Look, the only words that come to me are," and I just repeated that line. It seemed to be the only response that I could give to her at that moment. When we talk about the fact that we as human beings are what the Bible calls fallen, that doesn't mean, as I say, that we never see anything beautiful in anyone at any point. It's much more complicated than that. What it means is when we look at every human heart, we can see these sparks of nobility and beauty. And in the same human heart, we can see pride and stubbornness and anger and arrogance and greed, all mixed up together. I think that's a much more truer picture of what our human hearts look like. Life would be so much simpler if there were good people over here and bad people over there. Because then we could just get rid of the bad people and all we'll be left with is the good. But actually, it's much more complicated than that. This goodness and badness is found in all of us. And the question is, what do we deal with that? Now, this problem becomes even more acute when you think of the question of integrity. To be whole, to be one. How can we have integrity if our own hearts seem to have within them these different conflicting qualities? How are we true to that? Now, I can remember before I became a Christian, one of the reasons I didn't want to become a Christian is I thought it would force me to pretend to be someone I wasn't. It would force me to pretend to be perfect, and I knew I wasn't perfect. And I just wasn't interested in being a hypocrite. And I was very nervous about Christians. I felt about Christians the same way I felt about communists. They had nothing and they wanted to share it with me. And I just wasn't interested in what they seemed to be offering. And the reason why I was so sure that I would have an existential downgrade in life if I became a Christian was I was basically very happy, although flawed. And by becoming a Christian, I felt like I have to pretend to be one thing while I was actually something else. So my enjoyment and fulfillment in life would drop from its current level all the way down to the bottom of the scale. Now, where I got to in my own personal life was became so convinced that the Christian faith was true and real that I just simply couldn't ignore it anymore. I'd been looking into it for months and months and months, asking all of my difficult questions. And maybe you're here today as a guest or you've come here very skeptical of all of this, and you've got lots of questions. Well, let me encourage you. Go to the Alpha course. Go along on the Wednesday. Ask those difficult questions. Raise those objections. That's what the Alpha course is designed to do. Look into it and see if there is any truth in it for yourself. You may be surprised by what you find. It is actually both true and real. Now, some of you may be here and you may think of yourself as if you're a more on the angry atheist side. You really don't like Christians, you were forced to come here, and you actually think the Christian faith is dangerous. Well, if that's you, you might actually have a moral obligation to go to the Alpha course. Let me explain what I mean by that. This church sends money around the world to make more Christians. That's one of the things it does. But if you believe that Christianity is bad, you don't want them doing that. You want them to do as little of that as possible. Now, it costs them money to run the Alpha course. So if you come to the Alpha course, you're consuming their resources and they can't send it somewhere else. So as such an atheist, you are take a hit for the team. You're committed to consuming the resource here so it can't go somewhere else. So come along and see what it's like. But by that point, I was sure it was true and real. But I was still wrestling with something, and what I was wrestling with was huge. And as a matter of fact, what I was wrestling with, I didn't know it at the time, was described by the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 7, that bit I read to you. I have the desire to carry out what is good, I just don't do it. I wasn't pretending to be perfect. I had a few minor misdemeanors in my life. I'd faked a diplomatic ID in the country in which I lived, which meant I could illegally rent motorbikes underage and not have any problems when I got stopped for drinking too much while doing so. But apart from that, I was basically a good person. See, and so I can remember thinking, this is just very dangerous. I just don't want to pretend. And I remember going to a group of my non-Christian friends, and I come to the conclusion that I simply couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The truth was too important to me, and I had to become a Christian that evening. And so I went to a group of non-Christian friends, and I said, I'm going to become a Christian tonight, and I want you to know from now on I won't be enjoying myself anymore. And they were my closest friends, my 4 closest friends I had in the world. And then I walked off, and I went to this meeting, and I sat down with some of the Christians, and I said, look, I want to become a Christian, but I just don't know if I can do it. I don't think I can be good enough. And one of them looked at me and said, Michael, you still don't understand the Christian faith, do you? He said, you are never good enough. The decision to become a Christian is not the decision to be perfect, it's the decision to be forgiven. And that is what lies right at the heart of the Christian faith. God is not asking us to pretend to be who we're not. His truth makes things known as they are, and he comes into our life, and we can be real and true about where we have failed. And he is willing to forgive us and to heal us. He brings a wholeness and a completeness to life which otherwise just isn't there. And far from losing this whatever sense of joy I felt I had before, it was intensified. It multiplied many times over. To become a Christian is to receive the forgiveness that God himself has won for us through coming into this earth in the person of Jesus Christ. By going to the cross and laying down his life, and through his resurrection, Christ makes it possible for us to be forgiven and to be transformed, to have our hearts changed. Do you know that kind of transformation in your life? Do you know that kind of forgiveness? If you ask the question, why does integrity matter, you have to ask the logical question, what do I do if integrity fails? And to answer that question, there are 2 other questions that you then need to answer. Is there anyone I can talk to? And is there any hope for forgiveness? If there is no hope for forgiveness when integrity fails, all you can do is bury it and hope no one will find it. But if there is hope for forgiveness when integrity has failed, we need to be brave enough to ask for it. Becoming a Christian is an inherently humbling thing. It's not incidentally humbling, it's inherently humbling. It is saying, you know what, I was wrong about so many things in my life, including what God is like. And it means being willing to receive that forgiveness for him for things that we have done. And it means finding this new life in him, and it will change you. I can remember after having become a Christian, one of the things that terrified me was, gosh, I'm going to have to sort of do Christian things like go to church and sing. And I had a sneaky suspicion that God would, first of all, stop me sleeping around, and B, might even be interested in my money. And none of this was appealing to me. After meeting Christ and knowing this forgiveness and transformation in my life was completely turned upside down. I wanted to do these things because I had fallen desperately and deeply in love with somebody. It completely transformed my life. Where are you as you sit here this evening? Is it possible that while you're sat here this evening, you might describe yourself as a Christian, or you once thought you were, but you realize you've never really known this forgiveness, or you're so far away from him that it doesn't really make any difference in your life anymore? Well, is tonight the night you need to say yes to him and say, please, Lord, forgive me? Is it possible you've been thinking about this for a while? Maybe you have Christian friends, or you've been looking into this, and you just came here tonight just to listen. But again, as you're sat here, you're thinking, I need to say yes to you today, Jesus. I need you to forgive me. I need to deal with my own issues of integrity, and I need you in my life to change and transform me. Well, if that's you, I would love to be able to pray for you. Now, as I said, maybe you're not sure. Maybe you're just filled with questions. Come along and try the Alpha course. Ask the questions. I think you will enjoy it. It's run exceptionally well here. But if you are here and you know that this is the time when you need to say yes to him, then I'd like to be able to pray for you, if I may. And here's what I'm going to ask, if you could. Just take a moment just to be silent, just for a second. Maybe just bow your heads. If it helps, you can close your eyes. You don't have to. You don't know who you're sitting next to, by the way, so if you have a purse or a handbag, just put your hand on the bag. We lived in a depraved and fallen world, and you have no idea who sat next to you. And I'd like to ask you the question. Are you in that place this evening where you need to say yes to him and welcome him into your life, that you may know that forgiveness and that you may know that in your own life? If that's you, I'd love to be able to pray for you. There's nothing magical about this. I'd just like to know who I'm praying for. And if you would like to pray this with me, I'll just ask you to raise your hand where you're sat. And I know who I'm praying for, and I'll pray for you. Yes, okay, so I can see down here all across the floor, and I'm not sure. Up in the balcony, yeah, sure. I can see you guys up there too. Okay. If you are wanting to say yes to him, then please do pray this with me now. Father, I want to thank you that you know me. Lord, you see the desires of my heart and the great ideals I have, and you also see the other side to me that I try to keep hidden. And I am sorry for things which I have done, and just so grateful that you have come into this world in order that I may know forgiveness from you. Father, I pray, Lord, that I might receive the forgiveness from you that you want for me. And Lord Jesus Christ, I want to give myself to you, to follow you, Lord, to be like you. And Father, I pray that you will help me, Lord, to start this new life of mine well. And where I might need to forgive other people because of things which have happened to me, will you give me the strength to do that? Amen. Okay, well, look, if you did pray that prayer, then a friend of mine, Al, is going to come up here and he's going to lead the service. And we would love to meet with you and talk with you, see how we might be able to help you and serve you. Maybe there are other things going on in your life and you know you need to be able to say, and you need to be able to spend some time with God or have some kind of meeting with him while you're here. Well, that's all going to be made possible now, I think. And on my behalf, I would like to say thank you for having me here and for listening so well. Thank you for not falling asleep. And I want you to know that I can say with complete, total, and utter integrity that out of every group of people I've ever spoken to in my entire life, and I really mean this, out of every group I've ever spoken to, you are by far the most recent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael.